All right, so let's get started here. All right, so we are in chapter 5, Bays. That's 2, 5, 2. All right, we ready? Yep. Okay. So what we talked about until now was the different types of things that were created. So we have two main categories, and those are the physical and the spiritual. And then we had the descriptions of basically the physical things are things that we can sense, spiritual things are things that we cannot sense. And within the spiritual things, there were two types. There were the neshamos, and there were the nivdalim, the things that were transcendent. So the neshama are things that are going to go into the bodies, and they're going to do whatever they need to do. And the nivdalim are things that were created, but never were intended to go into bodies at all. And those were split into two categories as well. So the nivdalim are split into koches, powers, and malachim, what we call angels. Okay, and within each of those, there's lots of different categories and types and all of that. Then there's man. Man is unique amongst the entirety of creation, in that he is made of two parts, both physical and spiritual, which is not true of anything else. It says the animal kingdom is not made of physical and spiritual, that's purely physical. And even the life force, which we call nefesh, is not spiritual in nature. Rather, that is a physical force that it was put into creation itself, into the world, into the natural science of the world. There is power of life, and that's not related to spirituality. So mankind is the one and only creature that exists which is made of a fusion of physical and spiritual. Okay? Is that good? Brief synopsis, does this not ring a bell?
When it says there, the animal soul is the nefesh.
Nefesh is not, I don't like translating nefesh as soul, but I don't know that there is a good English word for it.
Did you see that that's what it says here, animal soul?
No, I didn't.
Did you see it?
No, mine doesn't.
Doesn't show
What
that?
does mine say? Let's see.
It says man is also a living creature and therefore also has a similar animal soul. Besides this animal soul, however, man also... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking the paragraph above.
What page are we
Okay.
on in the small book? We're on 70,
Yeah, no, there it is. There it is.
77.
Although animals do
Yeah, we
have a
even started
soul,
with
it is not a spiritual entity.
Yeah.
So what is that? So we even need to ask what that even means.
Nefesh, let's see. Nefesh, what do they say here? They call it a life force, not a soul. This is the, that's what I
Right, I
prefer.
think
But do you use nefesh to say life force too?
Okay. All right, so let's go. So now we're up to Beis. So Hanivroim Hagashmim. When it comes to the physical creations, Yiduim Hem Etzleinu. These are things that we know about. V'chukaseim, V'mishpateim, Ativim, B'chlalam Mefarsamim. The guidelines, the rules, the way things work when it comes to the natural makeup of the physical creatures, those things are mefarsamim. Those in general are well known. We know the science of pretty much everything created. We have a pretty good handle on the scientific makeup of most things. Now, certainly there are things that we're still discovering, and lots of things about energy and about light and sleep, all the really important, crazy, hard to understand stuff in life. We're still working on understanding things. But for the most part, we've got a pretty solid handle on all of that. However, haruchniim, the spiritual things, it's not possible for us to give a proper picture of exactly what those things are, because these are things that are outside of the realm of our imagination. Unedaber behem v'nyanehem, and therefore any conversation that we have about them, rak kefi hamasayir shebiydeinu, can only be based on the tradition that we have. Meaning to say, you can't imagine something that it doesn't exist, or anything like it exists, in your own life experience. So if a person has never experienced color, for example, you can't explain color to someone like that. It's not possible. Because it's not something that they've ever experienced at all, that they should be able to then draw a comparison or say it's similar to or anything like that. You can't. Because they've never experienced the concept of color. So something that exists, for example, beyond time and beyond space, that's almost impossible for us to even have any kind of concept of what that is. In our mind, if something is here, it's not there. And something that exists takes up space. So we can have these very slight, very far off comparisons, things like thoughts. Thoughts are the kind of thing that we understand don't take up space. Don't start neurosciencing me on that one. Okay? So we can kind of come up with that idea a little bit.
Thank you.
But we can't understand it. And we certainly can't understand things that are beyond time. So in order for us to give any kind of description for spiritual things, we have to realize that it's not going to be understood. We're going to give it words, and we're going to talk about them, but we're never going to understand them. They're not within the human capacity to understand. So we have a tradition. We know things about them, and that tradition is what we're going to work with. But beyond that, there's really nothing to do. Okay? All right. So let's see what he says. One of the main elements of these creatures is connected to or opposite anything that exists in the physical realm. There are also corresponding spiritual koiches. Remember, koiches are forces. These are the nivdalim. These are the first category of spiritual creations, not malachim, not angels, but the koiches, the forces that are called the nivdalim. So they exist corresponding to every physical thing that exists. Shemehem, that through them, or from them, mishtal shalim v'yaitzim. The things, the energy, the power, the existence, the influence, that comes down through a chain and comes out in the physical world. With one of the processes of this chain coming down the way Hashem designed it, Hashfalim ha'ela, down to these physical things, umikrayim, and whatever happens to them. V'nimtsoim ha'koiches ahem, so it comes out that these koiches, these spiritual forces, sharashim l'nimtsoim hashal ma'ela, they are the roots for the physical beings. V'nimtsoim hashfalim, and that means that the physical creatures, or items, whatever they are, every physical thing, anafim, they are branches, v'tailadais, and they are products, l'koiches ahem, of these forces. V'nikshar zeh b'zeh, and they are connected, tied to each other, kitaba'is ha'shalsheles, like links in a chain. Okay, so what he just said here is a very important topic, and that is that everything, and we've discussed this briefly in the past, but everything physical that we can sense has a spiritual source. So nothing exists purely physically. There's no such thing. Every single thing that exists needs to have its connection to a spiritual entity in order for it to exist. So this world, we have to kind of try to picture this, but the world that we live in and experience is not self-contained. It's not a standalone existence. It is all a product of a higher spiritual world that comes down through this chain system, and every link in the chain kind of changes a little bit until it gets here where it turns into something physical. One step up and it's already not physical enough for us to sense. A couple steps up and it's in a purely spiritual world. Okay? So that's this chain. So everything that exists, every leaf, every table, every person, every gust of wind, every single thing that exists physically has to have a spiritual source. And the physicality is nothing more than the manifestation of that source in this lowest world of the world of physicality.
So we're the lowest world?
Correct. Okay, does this make sense to everybody? Anybody?
How many worlds do we have?
How many? There's 4 basic worlds.
Okay.
So we're in the lowest. It's called the Olam HaAsiya. This is the world of doing. This is where choices are made. This is the only place where choices are made. Everything else is spiritual.
And the next
getting
world,
higher and
what's
higher.
the next one?
Let's see. I'm trying to remember all the names. There's Yitzira, there's Atzila, and Yechida. Is that what they are? I don't remember. I don't remember exactly, but so the highest is just Hashem himself. Then there's one level down from that, and then etc.
So there's 3 worlds outside of Hashem. I mean, not that they're outside of Hashem, but 3 worlds and whatever.
Yes.
That he had
The world to come is much more complicated than that.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a much more complicated idea.
It's not in those worlds?
Yes and no. Olam Haba is multifaceted. There's a lot of parts to it. So there is a part of it that is. This is a very large discussion.
I retract the question.
All right.
Draw the question.
All right. Let me just give you a basic idea here in very short. There's the world of souls, which is where the souls go, as we learned about, until the resurrection. Then there's the times of Mashiach, which is purely in this world. Then there's the resurrection. Yes.
Mashiach is in
this world.
Asiya.
Yes. Then there's the resurrection, at which point we started transitioning. And during that transitioning, we become more spiritual. And as that process reaches a peak, the world is destroyed, and then we exist in a new spiritual world.
The next world.
And that is the everlasting element of the world to come.
But is that in part of the next world, it would be the 3rd world that you described?
I don't know.
But the klipa, or whatever it is, that physicality that was just physicality, gets purged. We get into this new environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
On to what we were saying here, so that, like the idea that a mitzvah is represented by each of our guf. In other words, the
Mitzvahs are different. Mitzvahs are not part of this discussion.
So I'm saying to bring on the concept of a spiritual turning into physical. These
Okay.
shalshalos.
Okay. So we mentioned the idea that the Gemara says every blade of grass has a mazel over it that says grow, grow. Meaning,
To me,
Okay.
I didn't understand. To me, that what's created first, the malach or the grass? The malach, sorry.
it's not about first and second. Hashem created the world before he created the malachim. Malachim were made on the second day. So
So then how could it
let's
come
not get
from
into
malachim?
timing. Let's not get into timing. The idea, let's assume everything was all at once, just to keep it simple. So in order for something to exist in the physical world, it has to exist in the spiritual world, and that creates simultaneously a physical manifestation and a spiritual
There's
existence.
a spiritual blade of grass upstairs.
Correct. Now it doesn't look like a blade of grass.
It looks like
a spiritual force, which in this world takes the form of a blade of grass.
represents-
So are the mazalas spiritual forces? So you use
Yeah,
the word
well-
mazal.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about them later, but yes.
Mm.
See, that's how I always understood Nasa Adam Mitzalmenu Kidmusenu was that the demus of a physical, what's the demus of a Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't have a demus. So I always understood that the demus of a Kodesh Baruch Hu is the Torah, Kutsha Yisrael or Raisa Pattern.
It's not what the Mefarshim say there.
I always understood it.
All the Mefarshim, what Rabbi Goldman is discussing is when the Torah describes the creation of man, Hashem said to the angels, let us create man, b'tzalmeinu kidmusenu, in our form and our image. So all the commentaries ask, what does that mean? What kind of form and image? Hashem doesn't have a form or image. So what is it referring to? So the answers range slightly, but they're all within the same range. But basically, it refers to the idea of being alive and the idea of having intelligence and the idea of having free will. That's what those things refer to. Being alive, having free will, and having intelligence to have that free will. So that's, again, from all the commentaries that I saw. And there
That's how I
might be
always
more.
blended the concept of Yisrael, the Raisa, the Kutsha Yisrael Pattern.
Yeah.
The representation, our physical bodies correspond to mitzvahs.
They do.
So, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if the Torah comes out of HaKadosh Baruch Hu,
Yeah.
so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah, they're all on different levels, obviously. But then the Torah is a physical, it's a spiritual physical body. In other words, if every part of the Torah is, every mitzvah is corresponding to a limb, so then the Torah is corresponding to the body.
Yes.
And if that comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the Museinu meant the concept of bringing a physical form out of the Torah.
Well, the problem is that everything that exists is because it exists in the Torah. Yistakal b'ra'asa b'ra'alma.
Yes.
It's not just us. The entire, all of reality is in the Torah, which is how it exists. And this idea of there being a spiritual
So you have to
world,
enlarge it.
is that Torah? Yeah, I mean, that is Torah, but that's from a different angle. But yes, that's true, but it's not specific to us or mankind. That's the whole world.
The animals are a function of the mitzvahs.
They're a function of the Torah, not necessarily a function of the mitzvahs,
So
per
the
se.
mitzvahs, you could say, okay.
In other words, the entirety of
I guess
creation.
what I'm just struggling with is this concept that this umbrella, right? So,
Yeah.
So we're saying that it has a spiritual connection.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That the way the spiritual represents itself in physical is an umbrella. Of course, we have an umbrella.
Right.
So, but what's spiritual about an umbrella?
Nothing.
In other words,
It's source. That's
I'm
it.
saying, how can an umbrella in a physical, in a spiritual, be a spiritual thing? In other words, how could let me put it like this, how could a domain have
An
shiny
inanimate
physical-
object. The answer is because every single thing that exists has a purpose. That's what I'm here. So everything that exists has a purpose. So that purpose in a spiritual world is a piece of a puzzle. Just to give you a picture, right? So there's these 10 trillion things that all need to exist in the world currently. So each one of those, they're all laid out up there, and each one comes down and manifests itself in a physical way, and that's the world around us. So yeah, that umbrella has a purpose. So when you're up in that spiritual world, what you will see is the purpose. You won't see the umbrella. You'll see the purpose of that umbrella. You'll see the concept of shade. You'll see the concept of helping people learn Torah, protecting from elements, whatever. These are things that you'll see. Right? Morning, Jay.
Morning, Jay.
Take a seat. You want some coffee?
Yeah, come sit.
You don't have to.
You know, come sit in.
Help yourself if you'd like. So the spiritual things you're not going to look like they do here. They're not going to look like the umbrella, but they're going to look like the purpose of that umbrella. That's what it's going to be up there in that spiritual world.
Concept of protection.
Right. In all the instances that it needs to protect, that's what it's going to look like in that spiritual world. The same way if we do a mitzvah, like we put $1 into the tzedakah box. So here it looks like a piece of paper moving from point A to point B. But in the spiritual world, that's a force that was created of a mitzvah, of fulfilling the will of Hashem and all those other things. And that's what it looks like up there. It doesn't look like a bill in a box.
So each thing has its own, like you were saying about each blade of grass?
Yeah.
Or is it like all
No,
coming
each
from
thing.
protection?
Each thing. That's what the Gemara says. Every blade of grass has its own mazel.
But that's...
That means there
That's
isn't
the
one
mazel
mazel
saying
for all the
a
grasses.
mazel.
No, the Gemara says a malach. The Gemara says a malach, kind of like...
Mazel. The wording is mazel. But a malach and a mazel are really, they're going to be in the same category. We'll see. We'll get there. Don't worry. They're basically the
Because
same
if you
thing.
said that was created afterwards, so that can't be the... Well, you're saying drop the time. Like.
Yeah, you can't get involved with the timing over there. That's because those are malachim. Malachim are a little bit different than mazalas. Whatever.
Yeah, so, but
Don't
we
get
need
into
a
that.
Source. We don't need a malach. We don't want a mazel. We want a source.
That is the same thing. Chaim Friedlander says that what he's describing over here is the same thing that Gemara is describing. Meaning to say that when it says here that there is a spiritual force, mazel, malach, whatever you want to call it, that says grow, that is what Ramchal is saying over here, that it has a spiritual source. That is its spiritual source, which is making it grow. It's not actually sitting there with a stick saying grow, right, with a megaphone, right? It's not what's happening. It is causing that to happen, because that is its power. Its ability is make this grass grow, make this grass exist. The way it exists is by growing, etc., right? So it's all one and the same. So every single thing that exists has this element of a spiritual source, and the physicality that we see is nothing more than the manifestation of that down here. The way it ends up after it goes down the chain.
Can I ask a question to you just to see if, does it not seem,
You opening up?
what's that? Who's
Go
that?
ahead.
Hey, you want to get your haircut? Or just so you don't have to wait online.
What clients for you?
Maybe come back and join us.
Does
Okay,
it,
thank you.
isn't there a part of this that feels like it would be impossible for there not to be, doesn't it sort of feel like it would be impossible for there not to be a spiritual force component to everything in the universe? I mean, how could it be otherwise based on everything about a concept of creation? Because if it wasn't, then that would be like deism. Like, oh, God created the universe, and then he said, okay, go do your thing. But we don't believe that. We don't believe in deism. We believe that. So I'm just asking, doesn't it?
I'm just trying to get boundaries of the concept. I don't disagree with the concept.
The boundaries meaning.
Meaning he wants
more
to understand it
definition,
and not just agree with it.
More definition.
Well, you can't understand the definition without boundaries, right? Yeah. But
Well, when you say you can't,
if you don't know the boundaries, then you don't know what you're dealing with. Like, I would have thought, if we were
Okay.
just based on the first statement, was that all umbrellas are under the same thing.
not
They're all
having.
under protection.
Oh, don't say the bad joke, please. Thank you.
No.
Oh,
I'm not
no.
saying anything. I want
Thank
to
you. Thank you.
You would have thought it'd be the
Why
category.
is this umbrella different spiritually than this umbrella? I mean, right? If the concept is protection, but here it's not just protection, it's purification. I don't know, whatever. I'm just saying, I can understand that, but I was just trying to understand the specifics.
And help us understand.
Confusing? What?
I understand. There
This
has
is
to
so
be-
clear.
I agree.
I'm kidding. So speak your mind. Go ahead. What's
I
the
like-
I agree that there has to be spiritual. The
I
question
learned from
is-
that, for example, that each, like you were saying, each umbrella has its own unique force. They're not under categories. It's not like genus and species.
Right.
It's like each one is unique.
But each, I mean, is it, do you say that about the umbrella, or do you say every aspect
Thread.
of the umbrella.
What's
You know.
that?
Every
Where the
thread.
blade-
Every- yeah,
what the
every-
blade
yes,
from,
every
where it
thread.
came
You're
from.
saying if every blade of grass,
What
then
was
every
used
Every
for
thread,
it,
right,
and
yes.
thing-
Yes, I do.
Exactly.
Now, there are, as he touched on very briefly last time, there are also categories within these. So there's going to be broader categories and broader categories and broader categories, and each of those might have like a ministering angel, so to speak, that will be in charge of all this type of forces. And that will
Mid-level.
be in charge of that level. And there's a hierarchy until you get to the one Metatron who's, he has the name of Hashem in him, and he rules over the entire world, right? So there are certainly categories within them, but every single thing, in order to exist, has to be connected to Hashem, and that is this spiritual connection. That's it.
I'm good.
All right, Gail, what's up?
No,
Speak your mind.
no.
No, what's bothering you is probably bothering other people too. They're just not willing to say it.
Or we haven't thought of it yet.
That's the problem in the world. A lot of people don't say what they think.
Right.
They
A
feel.
lot of people do say what they think, and that's also a problem. She said the problem in the world is a lot of people don't say what they think.
Not that they don't think what they feel,
Well,
and
it goes
Yeah.
both
because they're too
ways.
scared to say it. You need to think.
I said,
about
go ahead, think about
No,
it.
it's just
Take
no,
time.
wait.
Yeah, don't rush through this. This is not the kind of thing you want to just like move
The
on.
concept of man-made things, even though Hashem basically made all the materials,
Hmm.
that there's
Yeah, nothing new is created,
nothing
right?
created.
Nothing's created. Everything existed
Yeah,
from the
that
first
Abel-
moment of
I
creation.
think that it's able would have some
It's
force
a nice element of this stuff.
Where was it then?
Well,
It
like
wasn't all like here, like things that
It was.
didn't even exist.
They do
Everything
exist.
did
The
exist,
threads
that's what I'm
exist.
saying.
The threads exist.
Man
I mean, this is